Thank you. I should know that. Call to order the September 22nd, 2020 meeting of Ag and Rural Affairs. The first item on the agenda is approval of minutes of the February 18th meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions? Hearing none, is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Next item is public appearances for non-agenda items. We have one person who would like to speak on a non-agenda item, Tom Clowder.
Thank you. Tom Clutter, actually I'm here in reference to District 4. I'm the alder for District 4, and I am here on that behalf. But I do live at 2583 Norwood Street in Fitchburg. The reason I'm here under public comment tonight is for 4 complaints I've had in reference to water. Now, I know you folks have already talked about water runoff with parking lots and water runoff with new buildings. I get it. But this has to do with neighbors. This has to do with neighbors to neighbor. And I brought this up to Public Works last 2 meetings ago, and now I'm bringing it up to you folks. It has to do with maybe for the future, an item in the future you can talk about, but I've had instances where, believe it or not, neighbors will run their drain pipes into their neighbor's yard and think nothing of it. When this happened, I did call Jack Pearson out. Jack came out, he looked at it, he said, yeah, Tom, it's a problem, but we don't have anything, we don't have any ordinance, we don't have anything to correct it. And to give you an idea, I have one gentleman that took his drain pipe, ran it under the grass, under the yard, into the neighbor's property, and thinks nothing of it, and flooded her side yard. Another one where an individual dammed up a property on Scion Road, where it goes under a culvert, and now the gentleman's having problems with obviously flooding. I got another one that did the same thing with the drain pipe. It was a new house, and I don't see this getting any better with the building that's going on in Fitchburg. In other words, like Terra Vista, where we have new homes that are being built, and maybe some people just don't seem to respect other people's property, and they run the water right into their property. And I'm not trying to get a neighbor-to-neighbor argument, it's just the opposite. I think we need something to be on the books that stops this from the future so we don't have a problem with water runoff with neighbors to neighbors. That's what I'm about tonight on that topic. I just want to let you know.
Thanks, Tom. Is there anyone else to appear on an item that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to, what? Oh, you just leave it. It's good. Okay. We'll move on to agenda review. Any changes to the agenda, Wade?
No, but maybe if we could just make an announcement about meeting length, Ed, for our discussion.
Yeah, we do have quite a bit on the agenda today, so we want to keep things moving and keep discussion and comments brief and to the point so we can try to get through it. We may not get to the final item on the agenda, but we're going to at least try to get through the first 3 under item 5. So.
And just a quick add-on, we do need to be out of here by 5:15-ish. There is a meeting after us, so.
First agenda item is item 5A, which is rural property assessments. And there have been some large increases to assessments in the rural area. And this was an opportunity for the public to ask questions of the assessment, and maybe you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Amy Mercer. I'm the city assessor. So I'm not exactly sure what you would all like me to talk about. If you just have general questions concerning items. I did bring a couple things along that if you'd like me to hand them out, I can hand those out to you. I'm not sure if you're aware of these or not, but the Department of Revenue puts together an agricultural assessment guide for Wisconsin property owners every year. They update that, and it just kind of describes how an assessor is to value property, real estate, and the different various classes. So I made a few copies if you'd like me to hand those out and look at those. I also printed out an email that I have that is kind of how we arrived at our acre-based classes. So, you have your tillable, you have your undeveloped classification, and the undeveloped would be your swamp, your waste, ponds, things like that. Your class 6 would be your forest value, and class 7 would be your site, like your the area needed for your buildings, whether it's a farm set or your home, and so the Department of Revenue every year they review large acre sales throughout the state, all the large acre sales, and when they do that, they'll break those out according to the different classes that would fall on each of those sales. And when they do that, then they'll look at it's called fielded sales analysis. And when they do that, they will look at how those values are coming within like each county. So they kind of blend those to see what that average rate is for a swamp, what that average rate is for a home site. And then they derive those for each municipality. That does not mean the assessor has to use those, but they're analyzing like all of the sales. They have all of that info to break out. They'll send out sale questionnaires to each farmer or property owner who buys that to determine if it's arm's length or not. So they're trying to derive the full value of that land. When you have the tillable land, your class 4, the tillable land is valued on ag use. So that's where you get that ag use value, which is much lower than what the actual fair market value is of the property. So like our ag use here, we have our tillable 1, 2, and 3. And I should have wrote those down, I didn't, sorry. But I think they're like $235 and $265 and like $295, somewhere in that range. They're in the $200 to $300 range per acre, and that's what you're assessed at, is that use value, but only on the tillable land. Your forest, if you have forest next to or adjacent to your ag land, then that forest would be the full value, but 50% of that full value. Whereas someone who would just have a residential site, a rural residential site, and would have forest, they're assessed at full value. So only the ones that have the tillable and have forest get the 50% of that full value. But I'll hand out these. I don't know if you've seen them before or not, but I'll hand it out. They have lots of examples in here, which I think really helps explain how those breakouts are done, and kind of why we would call it ag forest versus productive forest. So why you would have the full value versus 50% of that value. But I'll just hand those out, and then if you have, other questions or why. Another reason the values significantly changed this year, I took over as the assessor about 1.5 years ago, and part of the discovery this year was that those rural properties, their values were not changing since 2005. So I looked back and almost every single one had the same forest value since 2005, the same swamp value since 2005. Whereas like the residential, those have been being revalued every year. And you're not supposed to revalue one class without revaluing all the classes. So when you revalue the city, you should be revaluing every class each year when you do a revaluation. And so that was one of the areas that we found had not been changed since 2005. And that's why it had such a significant impact on the rural property owners.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. We have one member of the public who registered to speak with regard to this item. Tom Clowder?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom Clutter, 2583 Norwood Street, Fitchburg. Actually, I'm here as again, an alderman for District 4. And let me take a step back here a little bit and let you know what went on here. Approximately a year ago, I was at a meeting in the city, and I was informed that assessments were not done the right way for years because of the staff changes, which made sense to me. We had changed people in that division, and they hadn't been done for some time. Well, it was more the business. I could have missed it. I wasn't aware of residential, but it was more the business community. We were going to get them back up to speed as far as the assessments go. So I didn't think much of it for the past several months, maybe even up to a year. I didn't think much of it until I got a piece of mail in my mailbox from the city of Fitchburg. So what the city did is they, I'll just say, changed values, changed assessments, however you want to word it, for not only myself, but the rural residential people that I represent. I'm not directing some of these comments at staff to my right, because that's unfair. I'm taking it to the top. I've been outspoken on this. I'm mad about it. I think it was handled poorly. People got blindsided. No one saw it coming, including some aldermen and alder people. And what a time to do it, with people losing jobs, people's hours cut back, this COVID stuff that kind of wasn't under our control. I get that. I totally get it. But what a time to do it. So my phone started to ring about 15 times in reference to this. And I kept telling people they'd have to come to the open book, come to the city hall, talk to the city staff about it. I'm only one alder in the district that only has two people, two aldermen. I was not only taken back, I was shocked. My house went up $40,000. Not 4, not 14, $40,000. So then I go to a meeting at the city council level, and the staff tells us that they went up roughly, I want to say 12% or so much percent in the city. Don't even talk like that. Don't even say that. Because we have people in the city, in the rural area, that went up big time. And what irks me about this more than anything is we didn't have a heads up. I haven't missed many council meetings. I didn't get a letter in the mail stating that this was going to come. I didn't even get a letter with this increase, like the rest of the rural people in this city. And I'll even make it bigger. The entire city didn't get. They didn't get the heads up. They didn't get anything except here it is. And then when we talk about the levy and that, it's going to catch people. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's going to catch people. It's going to catch you. There are some people that didn't go up very much. I get that. I talked to one of my neighbors over the weekend. He went up like $2,000. But there's others that went up big time. I'll end it with 2 comments. I tried to tell the city council, and I tried to tell the mayor, and I tried to tell others that maybe we should have put out a letter informing people what happened. Hasn't been done. The open book that we probably are going to have that should be extended, for God's sake, for at least a month or 2. It should be extended so people can come in and talk to staff and let the staff tell them what happened and not just shut it off at a certain time. It should be extended. The way this was handled is unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it in the 32 years I've been here. And I know how it goes. But what a bad time to send it out. What a bad time to tell the residents of this city, take it, come talk to us, or just sell your house. They didn't say that, I did. So with that being said, keep in mind the times we're in. I don't know what we're going to do with it. I hope this committee can pass on something to the staff and the mayor and the administrator in their department with some help, because we sure need it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Sure. Tom, you want to take a question from Mark?
There you go. Tom, we had talked at length on this several different times. As an older person, I feel at this point in the game, one of our only options going into the fall is to look at cutting the budget and cutting it so dramatically that no tax increases. The mill rate will adjust so there's no tax increases for almost anybody. And then sort it out next year with the budget process. And that's going to be really painful because you're looking at, and my question to you is, what percent of a cut do we need to ask the mayor and the administrator to do to make sure that the taxes don't go up and we don't drive some of the rural agricultural people off their farms? Because that's what you're looking at doing. I understand the things will adjust, but there are some people who it will put them off their land. So what percent do we need? A 25% cut in the budget? That's going to be cutting staff. What do we need to cut? What can we do, as dramatic as that seems, to make sure, especially in this year where there is no, in some places, there is no, at this point in the game, you can't you can't rebuy a different type of seed that's going to give you more yield. You can't change from corn to soybeans in July. What do we need to do? What percent do we need to do in order to give this some time to sort it out?
Let me answer that this way, Mark. I haven't read through the budget, honestly. It just came out last Friday, and that's public information, so anybody that's watching this or wants to see the city budget, they can look at it right now. It's out there. I believe it was Friday it came out? Is that last Friday? It was yesterday? I haven't seen it. I know it was Friday, Monday, okay. It just came out, and I honestly haven't seen it. The problem I have with your statement, Mark, just a quick answer is, you're looking at trying to solve something next year. This isn't going away, if I said that right. It's not going away, and that's the problem I have. In one budget, you're not going to solve this. That's my comment quickly. You're not going to solve this in one budget. If you start cutting staff, I think it's a tough year for everybody's checkbook. But this just amplified it more. And this really put the icing on the cake. And I'll give you another comment. Maybe we should let people not pay this for 5 years out. Now, I just made up the time, but give them some time. Can the city do that? Absolutely we can. I have alders that probably won't agree with me, but we can give people time to pay. They still got to pay, so it's not going away. Tell me if I'm wrong, but this isn't going away from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing. So I have a hard time with 1 year. You're not solving it.
When I said 1 year, what I meant was maybe that budget cut is forever. And then you only allow it to go up in very small increments. And we learn to do with less, because there's a lot of people who are having to do with less. Now, in this pandemic, there's been some people who've done very well, but there's an awful lot of folks, and the rural people are some of them, that are in serious trouble.
I have a question, and I guess as long as we got both alders here and Amy's here too, is it possible or is it legal to do these increases more incrementally? In other words, rather than having them all go in place now, could it occur over a period of 5 years or something like that?
No, that's not legal, based on the statutes. I'm required, or all assessors are required to value at full value. Even if we did not revalue, and when we discover something, we're required to fix it then. Otherwise, I'm not going to jail for it, you know?
Yeah.
So we are required to assess at full value when we find something, when we discover something, we are required to correct that. Even if the city did not revalue every year and your assessment stayed stagnant, so when I worked in Janesville, we didn't revalue every year. But the community was much more homogeneous than Fitchburg is. So like the neighborhoods there, maybe the percent change would be like 6.5, 6.7, 7, 7.1, but it was much closer. Here we have such a diverse housing stock, so many different classes here. We have the rural ag, we have the residential, and our residential go from probably like a $70,000 condo to over $1 million condo. We have $2 million rural properties. So those high-end homes that are in that 800 to over $1 million homes, their change might only go up 1% each year, or might even go down 1%. Whereas the homes that are on that, the average home this year, I believe, was $330,000 was the average assessed value. Homes that are less than that, if you're in that 200 to 300,000 range, people are bidding and bidding and bidding to get those homes. You might have 10 bids, you might have 12 bids, and they're offering $10,000 over purchase price, $20,000 over purchase price just to get that home, because that's what they can afford. So it's a greater demand, and because of that, you know, you might have one neighborhood going up 15% in that year, and another neighborhood going down 1%. So it just depends, and that's why we revalue here in Fitchburg every year to try and keep it in line with what the sales are. If you don't do that, and the state will equate everything. So when they equate, they don't stratify like the assessor does here. They take that overall average change for the community. So like this year, the overall average market, just the increase based on market, not talking about if the assessments were out of line, just based on market, it was about 6.5%. So over the last 4 years, the market aspect has increased about 6.5% each year. You know, that's a lot. That's 26% in 2 years. An assessor is required you fall out of compliance when you're outside of that assessment range of plus or minus 10%. So that means in 2 years, every 2 years, we'd have to revalue. Well, if you're in that neighborhood that went up 15%, it goes up another 15%. If you wait 2 years, that neighborhood, their assessment would go up 30%. And I think the homeowners, you know, we can alter that however the community wants. I don't have a problem if I don't revalue every 2 years. And eventually I'd kind of like to get to that. But we have like the town of Madison coming in. Well, we're going to have to revalue when we bring in the town of Madison. This year, when we rolled forward, the state had updated their cost tables. So periodically, how do I explain this? The state updates their cost tables for the residential properties. And the last time they updated those was 2001. So then they updated them in 18. Then our CAMA company has to put all of those figures into the CAMA system. So this was the first year we could roll to those new cost tables. When we did that, that decision was made last summer. You know, that's when we have to do it. When we roll from one assessment year to the other, that's when we make that decision to do that. So that was 6 months before COVID even hit. So no one knew what was going to happen. And believe me, when I took this position, I had no idea the things I was going to find over the last year. And I've had lots of conversations, like with revenue, like, am I missing something here? What am I, why is this like this? I go back and I dig through the assessment rolls. I've extracted the database to see what exactly has been going on. So we're trying to fix something that isn't right. But I can't just say, okay, this class is going to go up, an extra 2% this year, and keep doing that, because that then would be considered inequitable for the other classes. So like if you're in the residential versus the rural, if you do that, then the person paying the residential is overpaying their taxes. And then they can sue the city for that, so it goes both ways. And there's probably, I know property owners are angry, but I'll tell you, I was probably angrier than you were when I was finding these errors or these discoveries, because it just should never have been. It shouldn't have happened. Everybody should have had their changes on a regular basis to keep everybody in line.
So these increases, in your view, really should have come up quite a number of years ago. And it is not, it's difficult, but one way to look at it is that people who got a large increase have been paying a lot less over the past whatever number of years than they probably really should have been. And as tough as it is to take that increase all at once, if it had happened incrementally, they would have been paying more in years past, correct?
Correct. So
So-
other people's assessments were going up, and the rural properties stayed stagnant. So
Yeah.
these kept going up and up and up and up. So they were paying more tax every year, and these properties were not.
Right. So one follow-up question, and I don't know whether you can answer this, because I know this probably isn't your territory, but eventually when we establish the assessed value for the entire city, obviously as a result of what's happening this year, that overall aggregate assessed value is going to go up quite a lot because of this and other development that's occurred. Based on what the budget has been, getting kind of back to Mark's question, do you have any sense for what that is likely to do to the mill rate?
So what'll happen, what typically happens, and it all depends on where those budgets go. So as the assessor, we often have a lot of angry customers thinking, oh, you just want to raise my taxes. Well, we don't do taxes. We set the assessment based on fair market value. Depending on where each budget goes, and that's the cities, the county, the school district, your taxes are not just the city budget. You could cut the city's budget, but, you're going to have to talk to the school district. The school district's roughly almost 50% of what you're paying in your taxes. And I think the city's about 35, 34, somewhere there, and then you have the county portion and the MATC. So each of those budgets encumbers, part of what you're paying in your tax bill. We did have a larger, this year it's a shift. So, the residential on average, and I haven't calculated everything since open book ended, but prior to open book, I believe the residential total assessed value change was about 8.4%. Commercial was almost 25%. That was that average. So some of those commercial went up 50% and some went up only 10%, so it all depends on where those properties were and when someone actually reviewed those properties is what it appeared to be with the commercial. The rural properties went up significantly. I think they were like 25, 30%. So yes, they did go up a lot, and those will be the properties that had a lot of those other classifications. I know one rural property owner, they had 2 parcels side by side, and their home site, with outbuildings, all their barns and everything, that overlap both parcels, you know? So the site value should have been the same on both properties. You know, if you're gonna use one value. Well, one site value was valued at $35,000 per acre. The other was $5,000 per acre. So even within that, those site values weren't even consistent throughout the city. And so all of those have altered and been brought in line. The overall for the city between all the classes was about 14%, 15%. And that's just taking the total assessment from last year to the total assessment from this year. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that if all the budgets stayed the same and you were at approximately that 14%, then your tax bill would stay about the same. It all depends on where you fit in that spectrum. But if you're higher than that, then yes, your taxes would go up even if all the budgets stayed the same. And there's no way to, you know, there'd be no way to accomplish what Mark would like, is to have no tax, because you're going to have people whose assessment increase because of new construction. About 30% of that total change for the whole city was due to new construction. So Promega, Hop House, Sub-Zero, all the residential, Quarry Vista, Terra Vista, all of those new houses, or even the kitchen remodels, additions on the back, a deck added, all of that is considered new construction. And even a plat, even if it's not the improvements, when you take a piece of rural property and you divide that into 40 lots, that's considered net new construction. That's higher land use than a plat, so that goes into your net new construction value. When you do that, that also shifts the burden, because you have new property owners that are purchasing or building those homes. So it's different. I know Misty Dodge, our finance director, she created a really nice video, and it's on the assessing page. We put it on there, that you can watch, and it explains kind of that total impact. She gave some various examples, which were really nice, because it kind of points people in the direction. I did look at the budget last night, and it looks like that levy limit, or the estimated, would be going down, because you have a, you know, if your budget were the same and you had a greater assessment, then your mill rate would go down.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, and that's why I'm wondering if some of the people who have seen large increases in assessment, and they may take a look at, you know, what their most recent tax bill was and assume, well, okay, we're gonna have to take this new dollar amount and apply it by the mill rate, and here's what my taxes are gonna go to. But if that mill rate is coming down some, it may not be as bad as it looks.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and, you know, if you're under that, kind of that average, you know, if you're at like a 6% change in your assessment, and that's probably not the case with the rural properties, but if you're at that, then your tax bill would more than likely probably go down this year. It all depends on what they do again with the budgets. You know, and when you have that net new construction, well, then they can, you know, based on the levy, you could increase that budget based on that, because you have more people. You need to provide more services to the public. All these new subdivisions, well, you know, you gotta pick up the garbage, you gotta plow the streets, you know, all of that affects that. More tax bills. Our office goes to more properties, you know, because we have to view more properties. We had, I think, over 1,000 building permits, and I think about 800 sales last year that we viewed. The part that I don't understand is why it occurred with the rural properties, because part of assessing is we are to review agricultural every year. Whether you revalue or not, we are to review that based on, we're supposed to be reviewing it to verify that property owners get ag use each year. So those are things that, I was kind of surprised to find what we found on those properties. Extremely surprised.
Thanks. Are there other questions? Randy?
Amy, you mentioned the revalue, and if I use this correctly, and from your past experience in another municipality, that revalue or going forward is, I guess we have a couple options there. We don't look at it every year, or is it just a predetermined percentage?
So it's not a predetermined, how do I say it? When you revalue, you're supposed to bring it up to market value. And there's different types of revaluation. So this year was different. We updated cost tables, adjusted land rates, everything. You can do an interim market update revaluation, and that's what we've been used to here.
Right.
Is where if your data's the same and nothing's changed, like you didn't add a deck or anything, and we see that neighborhood went up 4%, then we can apply a 4% market increase to that neighborhood. And that's what'll occur in the next couple of years.
That 4%, is that established by the state then, or?
No, that's established by us reviewing those sales. So every year.
By the sales themselves, okay.
The actual sales.
So as Fitchburg, from my understanding is from, at least from council, Fitchburg was one of the higher percentage of builds within Dane County.
Yep, that was the new construction
4 point
portion.
something,
Yep,
under
we had
5.
one of the highest
Yeah.
net new constructions. That percentage, that's where I was saying about 6.5 was the average for the city. So each calendar year, the assessor's office goes out and we review all the sales that occur that year. And when we do that, we determine which are arm's length and which are not arm's length, meaning, you sell your home to me, I have no relationship to you, it was out on the market, we had bidding, it's arm's length. If I was your sister and you sold it to me, then that's not arm's length, and we wouldn't include that in our analysis, because then that sale price may be tainted. You probably gave me a deal in that case, or a divorce.
And you know all of those particulars?
We go out and we ask those questions, yes.
Oh, when you do the assessment, the actual assessment, okay. That's
Yep, so we send a letter to property owners asking to view that property. We come out, we walk through that property, we
Right.
ask the sale questions, and we make that determination. When we make that, we have what we call a frozen sale record, and then you actually have your assessment record. So whatever that person bought on that date is the frozen sale record. So let's say you bought a home that's outdated and damaged or whatever, we'll put that in maybe fair condition, or whatever we see on that date of that purchase is what goes in that sale record. So we can analyze that data compared to that sale price. Then let's say you decide to remodel the kitchen or tear out the basement finish, whatever. So you'll have different data on your assessment as of January 1. You might have different data.
right.
So we look at that, but when we determine those sales and we mark those as arm's length, however, we have to report those sales back to the state. So everything we go out and do, we data enter in, and then we export that out to the state, to the Department of Revenue, and then equalization reviews those sales also. So even if something is an outlier, but it still should be arm's length, we're supposed to report it that way to the state, and then they'll DNU it. They'll mark it do not use if it's, outside the range, if it's going to change their ratio.
Okay.
And they'll look at that for equated value, when they equate the values between jurisdictions.
Just to change it for a minute, if rural was undervalued since 2005, was it? I know you touched on it. Do you know the reason for what happened? Why? I mean, I'm just curious as far as going forward.
No, I don't know why
You
it
haven't been able
wasn't.
to, and through your research, to determine,
No, I went back and I thought, why? Because I was told when I started here, they did a full reval in 2005 and they did a full reval in 2010. So I thought at least it would have changed in 2010. I don't know why. There aren't that many sales of like agricultural properties here, especially here. A lot of the farmers have lived here and worked their farms for generations, at least that's what I found. They don't sell their property. And so you don't have a whole lot of sales, so maybe they didn't change it because there weren't any sales. But eventually, that's gonna bite you, if you don't do that. So you look at that, and that's why I thought, well, if I look at the sales, because I worked in equalization and I knew the process, so maybe my background is different than the past assessors, I'm not sure. But I know that that's kind of how you would stratify, that's how you break out those sales.
Okay.
Is when you do have those sales, you break them into the categories and you analyze that. Sometimes the assessors will just mark them, it includes agricultural property, and they just report it back as not an arm's length sale because the ag land is ag use. So it's not at full value. So they may see a sale that comes in here, but the assessment's here because of that ag use is so different.
okay.
So maybe they marked them up not arm's length and they didn't have enough sales. I'm not sure. You have to look at what that full value is of that ag land when it actually sells versus the ag use value when it sells.
So you believe that that is corrected, at least for going forward? Not that that helps the situation, but so that
Yep.
we're not caught in this again 5, 10 years down the road.
Right. And going forward, I'll be able to analyze that and have my staff analyze that better. I can't put a whole lot of weight on past sales because I'm not exactly sure that those past sales were analyzed maybe appropriately, because I don't know what they were doing. But going forward, we'll be able to break those all out, watch that. Maybe those values will go down, maybe they'll go up. But right now, they're coming in line with what the state is using and what they analyze throughout the county. So our CAMA system actually has a way to share sales with other jurisdictions, but I don't think a whole lot of people are doing that yet. So that's something I'm hoping to work with the other jurisdictions that use Market Drive, because I can export those sales out to other jurisdictions also, and then they can push theirs out for me to grab and analyze and help analyze those better too.
Market Drive being the program that you use?
Correct. That's the CAMA system, the computer-aided mass appraisal system that we use. It has a lot of bells and whistles that I don't think have been used fully. And so those are the things that, the more we can continue to use those, the more we can, do better analysis, and that we can get those numbers better and better for the public here. And we will, I will, if we revalue every year, then we can change those every year. If I find they're too high, then I can adjust them downward, and we will do that. We're going to let the sales talk to us and tell us what happens. But, does that make sense?
It does, thank you. Yeah.
And if there's things that, and I tell this to anyone that we meet, if there's something that you want our department to do, then let me know. There's a lot that, I keep adding things. I know Mr. Jones told me this. I keep adding things to our website because that's the direction everybody's going. But I know he said that a lot of the rural property owners don't have, internet, or it's hard to get on the internet. It's dial-up, things like that. So if there's something else I can do that, if it means sending letters out to certain property owners, I'll do that. Just let me know what I can do to increase that customer service, because that's something really important to me.
Yeah, no, and Tom touched on that, and he and I are both in agreement that a letter could go out, no question. And I guess if we're in this situation again, or something similar,
Yeah,
please raise it to the mayor, or since you ultimately report to him.
yeah. And that, so if there's something you need, you just tell me. If there's something I can do to explain things better, I'll do it. If you want me to come and meet with people, I'll come and meet with people. I'm not opposed to, giving our customers the best service that we can.
Excuse me for interrupting. Taxpayers have been coming to you and challenging their assessments? Have you had a full,
Yeah, open book,
correct?
Open book was very, very busy.
Yes.
We met with over 600 property owners in the city,
And that's more than
phone.
typical?
Much more than typical.
Good, okay.
So last year, I think we're up to about 200 property owners, so this year it's 3 times as many.
Right.
Typically, board of review, we might have 1 to 3 property owners. This year, I think for board of review right now, we're up to probably about 100 properties that will be attending board of review. So it's a much higher, amount of properties that are coming in. And that typically happens when you do this type of revaluation. You're always going to have much more, many more contacts with the property owners.
Sure.
Roger?
Amy, you've done a super job. I came here looking for a lot of what you have explained, and I commend you for being honest on how you feel personally about this, as well as having the city at our best interest. But I do have a couple questions. I want to relate back to ag use. Does ag use valuation change, and if it from year to year, and how much does that change?
So typically when we review ag use, the easiest way, and if the farmers, and I'll use the term farmers, those that are doing the ag, tilling the land, if we typically will go into Access Dane and measure the area based off the air photo. That's the best way that we can calculate what is actually being tilled versus the forest versus the site. So we'll actually go into Access Dane and measure each area out as to what appears in those air photos. Those air photos are only updated, I think it's about every 3 years. And so things would probably be updated in that range. If someone does something with a drone and you have a different calculation, or if there's another site that we can go to with the most current, then we can go out and we can measure that. We have a lot of rural properties here, so, we don't typically measure and change those square footages that often, just like we don't typically change if it's tillable 1, 2, or 3 that often either.
How about the value, though, that you put on for
So
assessment?
the ag use, the class 4, those values come from the Department of Revenue calculates those. And they give us those values for till 1, 2, 3, and pasture. And so when we roll forward to that new year, those pull in automatically. So when they update those values every year, they'll look at those. They don't tend to change that much because your assessment is based on, you're assessed to the nearest $100 of assessed value. So if you're changing from, let's say, $235 to $240 per acre, that $5 and you got 40 acres, maybe it'll change $100, so it doesn't affect, and I think that was part of the issue, is a lot of these properties, the ag land might have changed every year, but the other classes that, you would have there, your swamp, your site, the forest, those stayed stagnant. So many of the property owners that have the rural properties, I don't know, I'd have to go out and look at what your taxes were, but I would bet then if your assessments were only changing maybe by $100, your taxes probably were decreasing every year, because you weren't at that average like 6-7% that the rest of the city was increasing each year. But I haven't gone back out to look at that. So you could go on Access Dane and go back into your past tax bills and actually see if those decreased each year because of that or not. I don't know. So
if you know the number of tillable acres, if one of our agri people know the tillable acres, then it comes down to whether or not it's class 1, 2, 3, or 4, as far as what dollar value you put on that for assessment.
the tillable, if it's tillable
Yeah.
1, 2, or 3.
Yeah.
Yep.
And each one of those categories has a different number,
Yes, it does.
and that comes from the state.
It comes from the state. I believe they look at, and I'm not good at that part because we never really get into it, but I believe they calculate it based on your productivity. That you can get from that soil and that land,
Yeah.
whether it's tillable 1, 2, or 3. The majority of Fitchburg tends to be 2 and 3, is what's in the current on most of the properties throughout the city. It appears to be 2 and 3 more.
Along the same lines of putting a number on different classifications, I've talked to several people and a couple of people in the rural community, and the woodland valuation has made a huge swing. In some cases, I've found that the woodland is valued at equal or higher than the cropland in value. How could that be?
The woods, when you analyze sales, and I'll use my experience working with revenue, when you analyze those woodland, the forest, here in Fitchburg, that value is coming in at $9,400 per acre of full value. When it is tilled, it's adjacent to tillable land, ag land, then that gets 50% of that. So that would be $4,700 per acre. And that's that full value. That's the market value. The market value for actual ag land is, for 2019, it was $15,200. So if you sold your ag land, that's what we believe it would sell for. But you're only assessed because of the ag use. You're not assessed at $15,200 per acre. You're assessed at that ag use in that $200 to $300 range,
Right.
depending on the tillable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that still puts a disparity between the woodland and the excess value of cropland.
Yes, yep. So your forest is there, and that's all part of, how we classify the properties. So if you look in here, it will describe what our forest is and what gets classified as forest, versus you only get the ag use on the actual tillable land. But you do get that 50% on the forest mark off, whereas, if you have a rural residential house with forest and no tillable, then your forest is that 9,400, right? That's the number we use this year.
I think that'll answer a lot of the questions that'll answer very well some of the questions that are out here right now in that regard. One other question I have, assessed value on homes. Tom talked about his going up dramatically. I think most all of ours have gone up dramatically. That's 16% or more. Do I understand correctly, you assessed the footprint or an acre and a half around the home as a land value that goes into the value of the home? Is it,
So, well,
maybe I'm wrong.
so what we do is the area, let me see if there's an example in here that would be better to show you. I know they have you go to page 18 of this guide. That'll show you like a variety of different classes on one parcel. So you may have a parcel that would have the area where like a house would be. Sometimes you'll have a rural parcel that'll have more than one house on it, or something like they rent a second house out to, whoever. So that second house, the area that needs for that and their swing set and the house, that land underneath that area, not just directly under the house, but, their yard too, that would be in that case, that's showing this as residential on this sketch. Then there's an area above it that shows the barn storage, riding area. That actually would be considered commercial because of the horses are not livestock. So depending on what those horses are used for, if it's like an Amish or something, then that could be your egg home site. But if it's something that you're using it to board stables and you're making income, then that would actually be commercial. Then you'd have your pasture here. So this one really doesn't show that, but it's really the area that would have like, let's say this is your whole area and you have your house here, your barn here, another barn, another barn, another barn, and it's all right in this area. Then only this area that is supporting those buildings would be your, I call it a site, that would be your class 7, your agri home site. Then the rest of this table is being tilled. So the rest of this table area, those acres, would go in as your tillable for.
Would those go under use value then, those other acres?
Yep, the tillable would be your use value.
Okay.
That's your class 4, your tillable area. But the site where the farm is, that would be like similar to a residential lot.
Oh,
So that's kind of like your site.
okay.
But the sales typically show you that if you have like a rural farm site, that site comes in a much lower rate than even if that was sold as a residential site in a rural area. And that residential site in a rural area is typically much less than a residential site in the city would be.
Okay.
So in the city, you might have 70,000 per acre, or per a lot, which might be 0.2 acres. And then in the rural area, it might be 70,000 per acre for a residential site in the rural. So that's, if that was in the city, that would be 5 times that. And then we have 40,000 on it for the farm sets, so that's per acre, so that's much lower, because that's what the sales tend to show us, that it comes in much lower, less demand to purchase a farm today.
Okay.
Other questions?
I guess my comment is very much along the lines of what Tom spoke to earlier. I just feel very strongly once this discovery was made, that people should have been immediately made aware they receive, in their minds, these huge tax bills in the mail. You know, I can't even imagine my grandparents opening that at age 85, if they were alive, having been blindsided. And I think a lot of rural residential folks are older, they're not using technology and computers, and we should value and appreciate that. And I think that you're gonna get a lot more pushback just based on how this was handled and drawn out. It's not over.
Ed?
Yeah, Raj?
I have another question. Going forward from today, you have open door policy, so somebody can come in and visit with you?
Oh, yes.
And that would be over and above the open book session or the board of review, or in other words,
Yep.
those dates have gone by. If somebody has missed those dates and still wants to come in and visit, you will be available?
Yep, you can come and talk to me, and it'll all depend on when that cycle, where we are in the cycle. But if there's something, whenever something is brought to our attention, we always have that ability to look at it. If I can't address it for the 2020 assessment role, I can address it for the 2021 assessment role. And I'm always available for anyone to come and talk to me about their value. If someone thinks something isn't listed right, you just have to call us up and we'll add it into our workload. Our goal is to have these values accurate. We have to have the property listed accurately in order to have the value accurately. I'm not how do I say it? I want the value right. I don't necessarily want to be right. I want the value right. That's my goal.
Okay.
But yes, you can, come in. I know City Hall, the doors are locked, but if you just call ahead of time and you come in, or we can come out to your property. We do a lot of owner requests for review, and we'll do them during open book. And it may not be the case with rural, but, even during open book, we did some walkthroughs and we did some Zoom. So if someone wasn't comfortable with us coming in, they use their computer and just walk through the house. And, I haven't quite figured out how we're going to approach it going forward for the 2021's assessment cycle. And we may do more Zoom, especially because we're going to be behind by about 2 or 3 months almost. So we may do office Zoom, for anyone, or offer that to property owners this year.
Thank you.
Mark?
Couple things. The city has a Heritage Oak program, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've always valued some of the woodland, especially the Heritage Oaks. And for some of myself and some of my neighbors who have a fair amount of woodland, that's not pastured, but it's woodland. And as I spoke with you guys, they have very few options when it comes to what they do to reduce their tax going forward. They could take that woodland, clear it, turn it into ag land, which would go against our Heritage Oak program that we have here in place. And if you're not familiar with it, that's something that you folks need to give some looking at. Yes, the cost would be high. It may be in some cases a principal issue with some people. Yes, I'll clear it, period. And if it's cleared, if it's cut and cleared before January 1st, I assume the taxes will be adjusted the next year.
The acres, whatever you have there, if you're tilling it, that would get your ag use value. I can check if there's any other type of programs that you could enroll in. I don't think it would qualify like for MFL or anything like that, but I could check with revenue if there's any other programs that you could fall into.
I believe there are some for the larger wood parcels.
you know, but then that
Where
would
it's
be up
managed.
to the property owners, and I can check into that, you know, if there is anything like that, and I can give it to Wade or whatever to bring back to you.
The small
see
acre
if-
parcels, example is mine, I've got a 5-acre parcel. My only options are to clear it
Okay,
and be damned the heritage oaks and turn it into cropland. Is that really the path that we as a ag and rural and a city government want to tell our people that they should go? And it's a very unfortunate, and it goes back to the presentation. You got some people that are really angry, Amy. And you've done a good job, and I've got to commend you. And I've talked to all 3 of your people. And of the 3 people, 2 of them have been superb. Unfortunately for you as the boss, one of your employees was not, was exceptionally rude. Basically, shut up and pay the money. Those weren't the exact words, but we can raise it unless you can prove it to me, pay the money. That really is horrible. And we're not sharing names here. You already know who that is. So, that didn't help your department at all. So what do I tell my neighbors? Do they get in an ag program that they can get some tax relief? And we try to save some of those trees and some of the woodlands that everybody loves, the rural area of Fitchburg. But with taxes like this, we're driving some of those people off their land. And we talked about the rural home sites. Well, some of those sites are, I know you have to look at it differently than zoning, but I think they're intricately tied together. And if you haven't shared our first, and the reason I know this, and the reason that was, do you know who our first zoning administrator was?
no, I do not.
It was the assessor, for that very reason, had a joint job. He was the assessor and the zoning person because they, at that time, and I still think they are intricately tied together. If I have a home site that's not dividable of any kind, I cannot divide it any way, shape, or form. It is not legally possible. That has less value. And you and I have talked about that, and it's a philosophical thing that I'm talking about. But you have to understand, that has less value. If I have a 35-acre farm with a house on it, I have to pay a commercial lending rate on that property. I can't go to Quicken Loans, Ed, you know this. I can't go to Quicken Loans and get a instant revaluation in a cheaper loan because of the land qualifications. That mortgage has to be held within the bank. It cannot be sold to Fannie and Freddie. And they usually run anywhere from 1 to 2.5% higher if you're going to hold a mortgage inside. That decreases the value, Amy. So there's several factors, and the people who have sat in your chair before, I feel, have looked at some of these values and hedged one way or the other. Whether you agree with that, whether you can do that, whether philosophically, I understand all of those issues. But you have to understand that that's what was done. And the firestorm that has been raised, some of the other ones didn't want to raise it. And so what do we do? What do we do as rural people? Are the other townships, have the townships around us raised their values in the rural land like we have? I've been told not. So what do we as rural property owners, rural farmers do? What are our options? There are options. What are our options and how do we need to look at that going forward? Because this will put some people out of business. This will force some people to sell, and with the pandemic, terrible, just absolutely terrible.
Raj?
One real quick question. Amy, there are programs out there that we're talking about for the woodland, and that's a big disparity out here between ag land, tillable, and what you mentioned. I mean, there's a big spread there. And on the tax roll, that's a big percentage of the total. And so, my question to you is, what is the absolute deadline? Let's say that a landowner goes out and finds a program within the next week or two, enrolls in it, which would identify a different tax position or assessment position. When do you put this all to bed? What's the final deadline? How long do they have before you can make an adjustment?
So the current assessed values that you have, basically, unless you are in the process of coming to board of review, your assessments are pretty much set until the end of board of review. Okay, because you would have had to come in the first 2 hours of board of review to make any changes to that, unless you gave your intent 48 hours before that to attend board of review. So the 2020, unless you have something out there, like Mark will be coming to board of review, unless you have that already in place, that will be set for the 2020 assessment roll. Now, if you go out and you sign up for something and you let us know that you've enrolled in a program or something of that nature, then we would look at that for the 2021's assessment roll. So it's where whatever was there on January 1. So you would have had to have enrolled in a program prior to January 1 of 2020 to have had it take effect for the 2020's assessment roll. So if you do that in this fall, if there's a program out there for you, that would take effect for the 2021's assessment roll. January 1 is always our assessment date. It's wherever a property sits on January 1 of each calendar year.
If we have a rural person out here who has not put the application in for one of those two, the board of review or for the open house thing, but yet has had conversation with your office, does that qualify for continued negotiation?
No, the statutes are very strict on cutoff dates, because we have to cut things off at a specific date each year. So Open Book had their specified dates, and by law, I have to allow 30 days between a revised assessment notice and board of review. And so board of review started, my mind is blanking, last Friday. And so we sent out revised assessment notices on the 18th of August. And so if you wanted to attend board of review and take that next step, so Open Book is the informal appeal process. That's where we talk to like over 600 people. That's that informal process. Then we send out revised notices to anyone that talked to us during Open Book or board of review. And then we have to allow 30 days because we revalued. That's a statute. Then we have board of review. So to attend board of review, you have to give the intent to file for board of review at least 48 hours before the start of board of review. Or you have to come in to the board and give, extenuating circumstances as to why you didn't give that 48-hour notice in those first 2 hours. Those first 2 hours are past. That was the first, between 9 and 11 last Friday. And so because of that, now they've scheduled or will be scheduling all of the people who gave their intent to attend board of review. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's lots of different appeal processes and steps, but there are very set dates that we have to do to keep everyone make it fair for everyone, I guess. So everyone knows that this is when you have to attend, this is done here. Now you can go to the next appeal process, and that goes. And if someone attends board and doesn't like their decision with board or review, then they can go to another step and either go to Department of Revenue or go to circuit court. So each level you go, it's a higher and higher process.
I've had a couple questions along that line, what deadlines we were under, what constraints we were under, so thank you.
Roger, part of that answer to that question is, it's a step process, so you have to go through each step. You can skip the you can skip revenue and go directly to circuit court. But you can't go to circuit court if you've not done the steps before that.
You could always skip open book. We don't recommend it. Open book is that informal. That's where you can come and talk to us and present us info. That's where we really want people to come. So I don't mind that I had 600 people. It was a stressful time, but that's where we can still look at things on a one-on-one basis. And, you can talk, we can have that conversation back and forth to make sure that value is good. Once that open book is done, then it moves, board review is like a quasi-judicial court hearing, At that point of board review, then it's up to a property owner to prove the assessment is wrong. I would rather you came and talked to us in the step before that, because then it's not, that burden of proof isn't on you telling me my value and proving that my value might be wrong. But at the board level, then you have to prove that value is incorrect. And it makes it much harder for a property owner to do that. And once board is done, then it goes even higher. But you do have to attend board review. That's required in order to go on to circuit court or go to the Department of Revenue for a 7085 to have them hear your case.
It's a step process, so you have to take the steps as you go along. And just another thing to tell the folks out there, and I've told my neighbors that, if you do get a program, if you sign up now for a program, you have to have that program documented. And you have to hand carry or send by certified mail to the assessor's office. So to make sure that they receive that before the January cutoff date.
Yeah, I'd recommend if you enroll in something, just call us and.
Oh, no, you need to do more than that. I don't recommend anybody to just call us. If you do that, that documentation has to be in place and delivered to you in a certifiable way. It isn't that I don't trust anybody, it's just that I don't trust anybody.
And depending on what program you might qualify for or enroll in, certain programs, we do a cross-check each year. There may be some program that I'm not aware of, but I know like the MFL, we do that. We get a list of what's MFL property each year. And our CAMA system actually interchanges that. So they pull that in and we can run a report and look at that each calendar year.
What does that acronym stand for?
Managed forest land.
Thank you. Many people, well.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's the trouble with acronyms.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
Tom, did you have another
Just
question or comment?
just a couple comments, and then I'm going to leave. Do understand that you have a sore here that's not going to heal. And you folks, I've been on that committee for years, can also, Wayne's not going to like me, have another meeting at the end of the month and come up with some guidelines and send it back to the city and send it to the alderman that's sitting up at your table, and more than likely I'll back it. There's nothing to say you can't have another meeting. All this information I'm hearing tonight, the city, and I'm part of the city, I admit it, Wouldn't it have been nice to have meetings on this? Wouldn't it have been nice to inform the public on this? Wouldn't it have been nice to tell the rural area about this? I go to the grocery store, put yourself in my shoes. I go to the grocery store and I can't get through the cereal aisle without somebody telling me about the damn assessments. And then I have to answer these questions. I can't go out down the street hardly when this came out without answering questions about it. And yes, I'm upset the way this rule came out. Can you tell? It's just not my house, it's the rural area that I represent. And I represent the rural areas I've represented this whole city in the past. But the way this unraveled, the sores are there. You haven't healed them. You may want to have another meeting and send something back to the city council or the mayor or the administrator. You're not solving it. I heard one person say tonight, and I don't blame him, I had that discussion in my house. You tell the rural person or somebody that went up big in value that they didn't have to pay their taxes for the past 10 years, they got off for 8 years, and see what they say to you. You're adding fuel to that fire. And nobody means anything by it. No, nobody means anything by it. I understand it. I really do. Nobody means anything by it. I don't mean it that way. But you're adding fuel to that fire. And that fire right now is hot. I don't know about Randy, but I can tell you where I go. I get bombed with this thing. Why do you think I came tonight? I'm not even on this committee, but I can tell you, you may want to have another meeting and discuss this and bring something back to the city and solve this better than we're solving it. I asked the mayor and the city council to send a letter for your behalf. And guess what? I think they blew me off. But people will vote with their pocketbook. And they will vote with remembrance. And they will vote who stuck up for them. But I'll tell you, this is a hot topic. I haven't seen a hot topic like this since a rural residential. That was that, Mark, 10 years ago, maybe, or?
No, maybe more.
Since we had that. And what did we do with that? We had meetings. We had open meetings. People could come and voice their opinion.
And they did. And
Have
we
a
made
nice-
changes.
Have a nice day.
Tom, let me just ask, do you have a specific suggestion as to what this body or the city could do?
Yeah. It was just kind of like what I said. You all, 5 of you, have gotten a lot of information tonight. I really think you have. Maybe you want to digest it and come back at the end, just a thought on my part. And come back at the end of the month and collectively agree on something and bring it back to the city.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm asking, what might that be?
What might that be? Even if it's late, maybe send out a letter to the rural area?
Well, a letter's not going to fix the problem. A letter is, hey, we're sorry it happened this way, right? Which would be nice. But it really doesn't fix the problem. I guess my question is, do you have an idea of something that could be legally done that would fix the problem?
Can we
Or
have that
alleviate.
board of review, can that be extended? Can the board of review be extended?
The Board of Review will go, like I said, you would have had to give your intent to file within the first 2 hours. Technically, you're supposed to give your intent to file 48 hours prior to the start of
Okay.
Board of Review. So when you say extended, Board of Review will run as long as we need to get through the people who gave their intent. So if anyone who was on the docket up until 11 o'clock last Friday are the only people that can remain coming to board of review.
Okay, another question. With the assessments being sent out, is there a way that you can give people time to pay what you've assessed them at?
And I don't do the taxes, so that would have to go to finance. I
So it'd have
don't know
to be
that.
crossed to finance.
Yeah, I set the assessed values. I
Okay.
don't do the taxes.
Okay.
So
It would have to be crossed to finance.
finance, and it might go to state, it might go to county, I'm not sure.
Gee, I
That's
guess I'd
outside
have
of my
finance come to this meeting.
my expertise.
I'd have finance come to this meeting and ask
Because
them
you-
that question.
You would still have.
I'm not going to point at you. I guess I'd have others come to this meeting, including the mayor, the assessor, excuse me, the city administrator, and who she just recommended. I'd have them come to a meeting, and I'd get some answers, and I'd go from there. Just some thoughts. I'm not,
Excuse me, Tom, I am on the finance committee. What would you be asking of the finance committee then?
okay,
At this point?
fair.
Well, I think what he's requesting is if property owners could extend paying their taxes. And I don't believe you can. I believe you have to pay, I believe that based on state statutes, everything else, that you'd have to pay your half by the end of January, and then the other half or in full by the end of January. So that's outside of, I believe, even the city, but that's not my expertise. That's
Randy,
not
it's
my-
probably a Misty question. I'm not
Right,
sure about
I'm
that.
guessing it is as well, yeah. But is it at the end of January or is that up to June, end of June?
Typically, you have to pay, usually, or at least every tax bill I've ever had, you have to pay one half by the end of January, and then the other half by the end of, I believe it's July?
Yes,
It's 6
okay, all
months
right.
later.
I thought I heard January twice, that's why.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, that's all right. Okay.
But just a thought.
And then I think we touched on the question earlier about, 5 years out or whatever, and that you just said that was not legal.
No.
I mean, that was not within the statute, so, okay.
Misty, would be, I think I'll tell you the same thing. No, you cannot
Yeah.
extend it, period. If you want the deduction for your taxes, they have to be paid by December 31st of that year.
Correct.
January 31st is your date to pay the half, and then that deduction for the taxes is in that calendar year. And then you're given basically a no interest, you pay that same amount, you can pay half and the other half at the end. I don't believe there's any way to amend that or installment that in any way. Ed, in the answer to some of your questions, the forest programs are administered through Dane County Extension and ASCS.
Right.
We could have someone from that office come with the directive is, how can we, as an Ag and Rural Committee, advise our rural people? How, one, they can try to reduce their tax burden as best they can and still stay within the rules. How can we as a ag and rural in a city preserve our heritage oaks without having the rural people want to cut them down to save their tax dollars? And I'll use Amy as an example. On her property, there's a huge amount of heritage oaks. And what we're telling the people to do by the way this was done, the whole thing, you've angered people. And Tom, you're right, that scab is not going to go away. Rural people are kind of funny. They're like the old Welshmen. That's why the Welsh and the Irish never got along. The Irish will say stuff and not remember it tomorrow. They may have had a drink when they're doing it. And the Welshman carries it all the way to the cemetery and never forgets it.
Raj?
I think what we need to look at moving forward from today, and that's really the thing that I think is important at this time, is without a doubt we have a transparency problem. There has been a transparency problem, no question about that. So what do we do about that? My first thought is information that we've got here. You put this lady in front of the people that are hitting us, if they would come, I think would answer a lot of questions. I really think. Now, the thing about it is what they're going to say is, why should I come to something like that and to learn more about why when there's not going to be any alternative for me to make a change? Because, you know, the horse is out of the barn. But I think that would be something our committee ought to consider, and not whether we would want to do that as a service to the ag community to make this thing transparent for this year. Because without a doubt, there are people out there that I know that are saying, well, what can I do, or why did this happen, or anything like that. Well, what we've witnessed here today, I think would go a long ways in helping the people that we represent. So I think that's something that we might want to kick around and see whether or not we would like to set something up like that. We have had meetings like this for the rural people once a year, where we have brought them in to bring them the state of the art of as far as what's going on in the city. We were not able to do that this year. So maybe in a large room where we can get people to be socially distanced to do it. So I think that's something, that's where we got to look ahead, how we're gonna do this.
Amy, you and I commend you again. You have said that you know, just come in and talk to me and all of that. Understand that as Tom, I'll use Tom's words, that that wound is not going to heal quickly. And so when I say if you make a change, you have to make sure, beyond any reasonable doubt, that it is recorded in your office, because there is no trust. With the rural people, you have no trust right now with the rural people because of the way this was done. And you told me that you wanted to put a letter out, and the administrator said that he'd handle it. When I talked to the administrator, he declined that. He did not have a memory of that conversation. So the trouble with an old Welshman like me is we don't forget. And when stuff is said to us, you might as well have told the elephant, because we don't forget. So there's some discrepancies there, and there is no trust, none. And the employee that you have has not helped that. Shut up and pay the money. So you have a rough road to hold.
Is there anything else? Okay, let's move on from this. Amy, thank you. Appreciate your time. Tom, thank you as well. The next item on the agenda, item 5B, is agricultural accessory uses in city agricultural zoning districts. I'm going to turn this over to Wade.
Thank you. So I'm going to refer to a memo in your packet, and then I'm going to give you a few PowerPoint slides that hopefully kind of parse out that memo in a bit more accessible language. So on page 6 of your packet, there is, I guess, a 3-page memo that kind of outlines what we're going to talk about over the next few minutes. So again, I'm going to try to reference a presentation here. So this is not in your packet, but we will have it up on the screen there. Let's see here. All right, so again, just want to talk in a little bit more accessible language, kind of what that memo stated. And if we do have time, we'll not just only talk ag accessory and ag-related uses, that the topic we're now on, but we'll talk about the rural residential development criteria memo as well. But again, starting with just kind of big picture ag, and I know for a lot of folks this is repeat. Obviously, Randy's a new member, so you know, as we all know, agriculture in Fitchburg is really unique. We have a lot of attributes here that a lot of other places don't have in terms of making agriculture a really solid and sustainable part of our city growth and development. So we talk generally about things like economics, environment, and identity. So we're talking business development, we're talking smart planning, you know, smart growth. We're talking about enhancing our local food system, and we're also talking about tourism and recreation. And again, just kind of looking at where Fitchburg is in the world in terms of some of our attributes. As we all know, we're minutes from a large metro urban core. You know, we're not Greene County, we're not Iowa County, we're very close to a large progressive market that's demanding a certain type of agricultural product. So all that being said, again, that offers us opportunities both within Fitchburg and in the region that we may not have elsewhere as it relates to, again, enhancing our agricultural sector. And these are just kind of some examples of some ag accessory and ag-related uses that we'll generally discuss. So why are we doing this? Well, generally speaking, there is policy direction in both our comprehensive plan, which was recently adopted in 2020, as well as our ag plan, which was adopted in 2017, that basically says the city as a body shall explore expanding basically ag uses that support agriculture in some aspect. And the idea is that these uses aren't agricultural per se, but they, again, support and enhance quote-unquote agricultural uses. And when I talk about agricultural uses, we are talking about a very strict definition. This definition comes from both state statute as well as our city ordinance. So I'm not going to read that laundry list to you, but again, when we talk about ag uses, we are talking about very specific things that happen on our agricultural lands. So now let's kind of transition into what we're calling ag accessory and ag-related uses. When we talk about ag accessory, again, this is all in that memo. I'm trying to kind of paraphrase and summarize some of that memo content. So just really condensing that ag accessory definition, we're talking about uses that support and are incidental to or not inhibiting agricultural use. Again, those uses that we just saw in the previous slide. When we talk about ag-related uses, we're talking a little bit more specifically about uses that directly support agriculture, or agricultural uses. And then we also have this idea of what we call agricultural entertainment uses, which, in my opinion, could be both, or could be either ag accessory or ag-related, but they do need to meet a certain definition. And that definition is, again, summarized. There's a longer definition in the memo. But again, this definition is in our zoning ordinance, and it clearly defines what an ag entertainment use is. So all that being said, again, as we continue to explore this idea of expansion of ag-related uses, staff is putting forth a recommendation at this early stage. And essentially what we're saying is that, well, I guess backing up, how do we get to this recommendation? We basically talked with other governmental units that have similar land uses that we have. I talked with Dane County, some other rural areas that have similar land use dynamics. And then we also looked at our city's comp plan. We looked at our ag plan. We looked at our zoning districts, and we looked at the general intent of all those plans and those districts. And we also looked at specific policies and regulations contained in those plans and ordinances. So again, that's how we came up with the recommendation. So that brings us to the recommendation, and what staff is proposing at this early stage is to basically continue research on allowing new permitted and conditional agricultural accessory and related uses that would basically expand opportunities for processing and distribution of ag commodities produced on site, as well as exploring potentially new agricultural entertainment activities. So what this first recommendation is stating, it's very specific. It's saying in our ag districts, we want to look at potentially allowing new types of uses, but a very specific type of new use. Subsequent to that, we also want to explore the idea of clarifying the definition of ag entertainment to make sure that when we talk about any proposed ag entertainment uses, those uses are connected to and dependent upon an allowable agricultural, ag accessory, or ag-related use. And the second part of that definition would be to make sure we clarify that any entertainment use that meets that first parameter is also secondary to a primary ag-type use on the property. So that's two pieces of the recommendation. The third piece is we kind of shut the door on any additional new uses. We stop at basically 1 and 2 in terms of expanding our, or modifying our zoning ordinance, and that's kind of where we stop. So the thought was, obviously, we could have a discussion today, but based on the direction that staff gives me, or that the committee gives me, I will then prepare draft policy language based on that direction, and then come back at a future meeting to present that draft policy language. And then the goal would be at that next meeting to have the committee recommend that draft policy language to the Plan Commission, and then it would go up the food chain from there. So with that, I'm done with that section. Any general questions or comments?
We have one from the public. Jeff, do you want to speak?
My name's Jeff Schleicher, 3491 LaFleur Court in the town of Middleton. And I think other than Randy, all of you were at your last meeting in February where I discussed the whole issue of a brand new construction for a wedding venue. I own 31 acres on Burn Road, as you know, bordered on the north by Umark and the east by Highway 14 and the west by the railroad tracks and the south by Burn Road. So I won't get into all the details of that right now, but I guess the issue right now is, as the staff recommendations right now, it seems to me that you would be excluding any potential for the construction of a wedding venue. And so where I'm at right now is asking you as your committee to at least keep that door open and consider that possibility. I think if you look in Dane County and the surrounding areas, there's already a lot of wedding venues, or at least quite a number. And a lot of them are basically old barns, some of them fire hazards, some of them not well suited to the job at hand, whereas what we're actually suggesting is something that would be state-of-the-art. It would be, I shared with you pictures in the past of the concepts that we're looking at. They would look like a barn, a stable, very attractive, and it would be very consistent with the rural type picture that you're trying to maintain in the city of Fitchburg. In the community survey, trying to remember the timeline, I guess that was last fall already, in the lead up to the comprehensive plan, there was actually quite a bit of strong support for something like a wedding venue and other agricultural accessory uses. But very specifically, it was right in there, wedding venue, and there was a lot of strong support. That's the way I've always approached this whole concept, is that I think it would be a very unique and promising asset to the community of Fitchburg. Little tongue-in-cheek, but you talked about a large venue for getting together your rural constituents. Well, here you go. That's one opportunity. And it's also consistent with economic development to help your tax base. That wouldn't require, it's not going to send more kids to schools and whatnot, but that's an aside. Really what I'm looking at is this, you almost need to think outside the box for this whole concept, because by its nature, it's a business endeavor that needs to be in a rural setting. If you like the idea of a wedding venue in the form of a barn, I can't put it on Seminole and PD, okay? It just doesn't make sense. So it's an out-of-the-box concept, and probably that's where we're struggling with all of this, is that it needs to be in a rural setting, yet it's a business endeavor. So I'm asking people to think about it holistically. Is this something that you think would be neat for the city of Fitchburg and for the rural community, and provide a service to the community and its members in order to have life celebrations there, weddings primarily, but obviously other celebrations, community uses, what have you. And at this point in time, all we're asking is to keep the door open, and eventually, you know, we'd get to a point where if the ordinance is passed such that it would allow such consideration, then we can get specifics, we can go through a zoning request, we can present plans, formalities, go through all of your recommendations and requirements, and we're more than willing to go through that whole process. But right now, I would just hate to see you just shut the door on this and miss an opportunity for something that I think would be really neat for the rural community and the city as a whole. So that's basically my 2 cents worth at this point in time.
Any questions for Jeff? Thanks, Jeff.
And I can share any pictures and stuff that I shared with the rest of the committee as well.
Is that something you can send to me via email, or?
Sure,
All right,
yeah,
if you
and I've got your email in the
Yeah.
list there,
Yes.
so, yeah.
It's on the city website as well.
Yep, all right,
Thank you.
thank you, Randy.
I do have a question, Jeff.
Yep.
And we've talked at length about this, and we've talked about your site specifically. And I am very open to keeping the door open to the concept. But understand, it cannot harm the existing agricultural environment. And in certain situations, the case of your specific location, the traffic is a problem for you. Dumping 100 cars out on Burn Road, half of them drunk, is a problem for you. Or a Sunday afternoon meeting where it disrupts the neighbors is a problem for you. Large noise stuff is a problem for you. On a farm on County Highway M, probably not as big an issue. So as long as whoever applies for that goes through the proper channels and adheres by, the rules, I don't have an issue with it.
Okay. It is a little bit of a unique property in that probably the western third of it is within the wetland buffer zone or whatever. So you can continue to till it, and actually probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the property would continue to be tilled. It's just the eastern part up on the hill that we'd be using. And definitely understand those concerns, and we're more than willing to do whatever we can to address it. And in fact, you had suggested talking to neighbors, and obviously right after that, I talked to Patrick Kane and got his blessing, but beyond that, I have names and numbers, but I didn't think those people wanted me to show up on their doorstep on March 15th anymore, so I just kind of put that on hold until we get through this process right here today. So.
As I told you, that in your business plan, the purchasing of those houses, if I were you, would be part of my business plan.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Okay.
all right.
Other
Thank you.
comments or questions with regard to Wade's presentation? I'll start. One question that I have with regard to agricultural accessory use is, in items A and B, it says integral part of or is incidental to. I really don't know what that means.
I mean, that's an interpretation by a zoning administrator. I guess we could look at previous approved ag accessory uses and maybe come up with some sort of parameters for interpretation, but that is, there's some wiggle room there in the ordinance for an interpretation, I would say.
I guess my question is, does that language even need to be there? I mean, if you just lined out or is incidental to, I mean,
Well,
if it's an integral part of,
yeah, so-
that's what we're getting after, right?
So that actually use comes from state statute for our certified farmland preservation districts, or AX district. So if we want to continue to allow ag accessory uses in that district, I believe we would need to abide by probably that definition. If we're talking non-certified districts, like our ag small and ag transition, we could open up that definition a little bit.
So in AX, this would need to be there if we're going to consider agricultural accessory uses.
Yeah, again, remember that that district is certified by the state
Yeah.
to allow for eligibility for tax credits. And in return for that eligibility, that district has to abide by certain state definitions and
But
requirements.
we could take that language out in AT and AS.
Correct.
Okay. I would prefer to see us do that.
Okay. So
I
let me
don't know
just,
if anyone else has any.
Where are you at?
let me get to the, so are you looking at the memo, Ed? Is that where we have the full
Yeah,
definition?
look at the top of page 7.
Okay, so let me get there. So yeah, page 7 in your packet. The text starts out, for the purposes of this memo, definition of agriculture accessory use is as follows, and then I think in the A under that, we talk about incidental. So Ed is saying potentially striking that from language in our ag small and our ag transition districts.
It just seems like very squishy language that is open to an awful lot of interpretation.
Yep.
And isn't necessary, because if something is integral to agriculture, I think that's what we're after.
Yeah.
So I don't know
And I
why
think
we
part of
need
it
more
too is,
incidental.
I think that cap the state, I think what they're trying to do there is allow for, sometimes you get in trouble when you try to list every use in a zoning ordinance, and then all of a sudden you get a use that isn't in there. So I think they're recognizing kind of the fluid nature of agriculture and allowing for some level of staff interpretation if there's uses that are, maybe emerging trends that aren't clearly identified in existing codes, but, yeah, point taken.
Are there other thoughts or comments? I
On
mean,
that same page,
yeah.
down on agriculture accessories, Wade?
Yep.
Is this the appropriate time to look at those?
Where are you looking at?
Under the same page, page 7, number 3.
Oh, under item 3.
Oh, the actual,
Do we want to kind of combine item 2 and item 3 here, Wade?
sure.
Okay.
I just item 3B, wind towers or digesters are a permitted use.
Uh-huh.
If wind towers are there, shouldn't solar be there?
And again, don't quote me on this, but I think there is some language in state statute that requires allowance of certain types of utilities. So I will double check that.
Well, solar could be private.
Well, sorry, not utilities, but power generation
Yeah.
things.
If we're
Yep.
going to add the one, I think we should at least identify the
Yeah.
other.
Yep.
'Cause those are up and coming trends.
Right,
And I view, like the O'Brien property, I view that electricity that they're creating as a crop. That's
Yep.
my personal view.
right.
And it should be considered an agricultural crop if it's viewed on
Yep.
agricultural land.
Okay.
So this actually says to serve a single farm. So I think the O'Brien project is very different than this.
But then we need to put it in somewhere.
And I think my goal here is just to get feedback
Yep.
on ideas, and then I'll come back next meeting with the smorgasbord of options, and then the committee can hash out, the final
The other
Final
question I
policy
had
language.
along those same lines, that's why I'm real specific that I want to, so if I put an array of solar where I grew corn last year, is Amy going to take that and create and raise my taxes on that? So I think we have to identify and be pretty clear how we identify. If we want that to stay as an ag use. And that's where I'm coming from.
So if you're talking about an array of solar that would generate power that is sold to MG&E, I mean, that's not what, I don't think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a wind tower or manure digester to serve a single farm. If you want to put solar on top of your barn to run electricity to the barn, that would be a fit here. But if you want to put in a solar farm to sell it to MG&E, that's a commercial endeavor.
But Ed, most digesters, at least the ones that are in this area, are not single farms.
I know, but that's what the wording here is.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's why
Well, and
I'm
if we-
raising those questions.
And if we're talking about manure digesting and not power generation, if you go to the next page, under ag-related uses, that's where we do kind of open the door for manure digesters that serve more than one farm operation. I'm looking under
Yep.
letter D there. And what's interesting about the ag-related language in our code is we don't specifically state conditional uses, we just give examples, and that's literally the language. You know, in every other part of our code, we state specific allowable uses. In this section, we just kind of give some very broad examples.
Well, there's where I think, whichever place we put it,
Yeah,
I think solar has a place in there.
Yep.
so that could be added as I
Yep.
after H.
Yep.
Because I think you're going to see more and more of that. I really do. As we move forward here.
Yeah, and then under permitted, on a B, we could also add solar where you have wind tower or manure digester.
Yeah, right.
I don't know whether that's even necessary. I mean, anyone can put a solar panel on their roof, I mean, right? So,
Well, and my neighbor just put an array in.
Yeah, and I think wind tower is identified because it's historically been more contentious, you know, in terms of the scale of
Yeah, no,
the infrastructure and neighbors and those sorts of things.
But it's, O'Brien is one example, and then Lori's property just put in an array of solar. So there you have the, you know, the private and the commercial. So they're both here. And I think you're gonna see more and more.
other comments, or Raj?
Yeah, back on the wedding venue, I would encourage Wade for you to move ahead on that. And the way I look at it is having a wedding venue in Fitchburg could conceivably have somewhat of an economic impact in a positive way. And it is something that would be an alternative to a landowner for additional value that he might gain by having somebody that's interested, you know, like Jeff, to buy the land at above market agriculture value. So I see there's some pluses possibly there. As far as how we put that into our ag program, I'm not sure how that's going to fit. I'm sure we'll probably work on that and make that happen, possibly, but we don't want to bypass an opportunity for any reason that is if it wouldn't fit, and so we drop it.
If I could just ask a clarifying question. I think we need to make a distinction between wedding barns that support agriculture and are secondary to an agricultural use, and a wedding barn that essentially doesn't do that and merely takes advantage of a agricultural location. So that's where I think, and again, we don't need to figure this out now, but I think those are kind of the two options that we have before us when we talk about this idea of a wedding barn concept. Does that make sense?
It definitely makes sense. But along those lines, let's us not pass up an opportunity because one or the other doesn't fit. A person that is wanting to invest in the city for something like this. We have to stay open-minded on it. We may have to maybe have a zoning completely out of the ag realm to make it work. I certainly would like to talk to Mike Zimmerman about the economic development of what he thought this type of thing might do for the city. Certainly he's probably aware of economic impact like we're talking. And so I want to encourage us to stay focused on this and see where it goes.
I guess my comment would be I'd probably a little bit more with weight on this. If I were going to consider something like this, say as a conditional use, I'd want to take a look at, all right, where is this and what's being accomplished here? Now, if someone came in and said, all right, I want to put a use like this on a county highway and restore an historic barn and preserve it, I would view that very, very differently than, Jeff's proposal where he wants to build a new one, which, believe me, if you take one, you're going to have all sorts of people with their hands up wanting to do that. And putting it on a rural road where you're driving traffic, as Mark mentioned, at times when the neighbors are not going to want that traffic. So I do, Jeff, I got a problem with your project where you're locating it, but I could imagine a situation in which I think it would make more sense to me.
Yeah. Just a couple comments, may I?
Sure.
Anyway, I can speak loud enough. This property that I'm looking at, and this is maybe how you distinguish this project from others, is it's actually in the future urban development area of Fitchburg. So that's one condition you could put on anybody coming to request something like this. Secondly, it's in the rail corridor, which is specifically what Fitchburg has always said they want developed. And third, if the alternative is housing on here, that would generate, I don't know, do the numbers, do the math, 10 times more traffic that this facility would generate 1 or 2 evenings a week. So I understand, and we could even do things to, capacity limits. Typically weddings, half the people don't drive there anyway, they're taking buses. There's different things to look at, but that's what I'm saying is we could get into a lot of that nitty-gritty stuff to address your concerns if the opportunity, the door still stays open. Because I understand, you don't want everybody and their brother plopping them all over the city, but specifically, that's why I was thinking this is unique in that it is in the future urban development area right on the rail corridor. Yep.
And I know we're getting short on time, but I just wanted to clarify too, kind of putting the wedding barn, ag entertainment idea aside. Another big piece of what staff is talking about is this idea of allowing more processing and distribution of ag commodities produced on site. And again, I think that's just reflective of what we're seeing regionally in terms of this local food system and people, canning salsa or, think about Apple Garden. That's a little retail establishment that, sells its Apple products on site. So I just wanted, before we run out of time, is the committee generally okay with staff exploring new opportunities there with some language?
Yeah.
Apple Garden right now is not even a conforming use.
Correct. Yep.
No, I'm okay with that. You wait on page 9?
Yep.
What is, there we got an acronym again.
So you're in the memo or the packet?
ETJ. What is that?
Oh, yeah. So now we're moving into the 5C. Is that what you want to do, Ed, or do you want to stick to?
Yeah, that's the next thing. I couldn't find where that was, any definition of that.
So that's getting into the RDC. So I guess if
Yeah, let's finish up this topic.
Okay.
Because I don't know if we have time
yeah,
for that topic or the rural broadband.
I could probably cover the RDC, at least give you guys an intro quickly if you want to.
Okay. Was there anything else on ag accessory uses?
So again, what I will do is take some of the feedback, come back to you at the next meeting with some draft language, and it might take a couple meetings to get it worked out. But again, the ultimate goal would be to create some tweaks to our existing zoning ordinance. All right. 5C, this was put together by my coworker Lisa. I think most of you know Lisa. And this really just kind of talks about clarifying some RDC policy interpretation that staff has done historically, but we just wanted to kind of get it on paper for quite a few different reasons. Just bear with me, I'm going to put the presentation back up. Okay, so again, I'm just trying to paraphrase the memo, summarize it a bit. So really 3 pieces to Lisa's memo: farm consolidation, using and transferring claims, and then approving house sites. And again, for our new members, when we talk about rural residential development criteria, we use the acronym RRDC, and that basically allows for rural landowners to use a certain amount of their land to develop rural residential home sites. There are upper limits to that. You know, we're not going to be creating subdivisions in our rural areas, but this does offer the opportunity for farmers to make a little bit of revenue off their land as it relates to residential development. So farm consolidation is the idea of basically taking existing farming operations that may not be used for farming anymore. So think about, you know, grandpa and grandma are getting out of farming, they want to stay in their house, but they want to sell their 80 acres off to somebody else who is currently farming. So what they do is they create a little lot, let's say a 5-acre lot that has their house, their garage, their outbuildings on it. They're able to stay in that house, and then the rest of the land goes in a new ag lot and can remain in farming. So Lisa just talked about clarifying some of those processes as it relates to farm consolidation. Literally nothing has changed. We are just, again, putting on paper what staff has historically done as it relates to farm consolidation. The second piece of Lisa's memo is talking about using and transferring claims. Again, literally nothing is changing here. We're just putting on paper some processes. I think one thing we have started doing in the past couple of years is a better job at record keeping with our claims. So when I say claims, I mean those are the ability for landowners to use those development sites that we talked about. Yep. So really, it's just about record keeping, making sure staff knows what's going on, making sure you guys know what's going on, making sure our landowners know what's going on. So again, nothing new there. And then the last piece is this idea of house site approval, and this came up relatively recently. So the idea would be somebody could create a lot, they could create a RRDC lot, but literally just create the lot and not identify a home site. So if that, well, I guess I'm jumping down to the second bullet point there. So if that happens, and this is, I think, what we did most recently with, I forget the landowner's name, but this came before the committee recently, where there was a lot created, but a home site not identified.
It was on the personal property.
Yeah, so what happened is that person had to come back to get that house site approved, you know, at another meeting. So again, this is just kind of stating that process. What we also want to make sure is that if and when that lot is created, and there is a potential that the applicant would need a waiver to one of our RRDC criteria, that residential infill criteria, which says the new house site needs to be within 300 feet of an existing home site. We want to make sure that's noted when that lot is created. So there's no surprises, you know, when they come back and ultimately get their home site approved. So again, just making sure that we're dotting our I's, crossing our T's. And then moving back up to the first bullet point there under house site approval, again, just clarifying process. I think this also came up recently where one of our criteria that we use to allow RRDC home sites is, again, this infill requirement, meaning if you want to use a claim, use an RRDC home site, your house site needs to be within 300 feet of an existing home site. There was some ambiguity in the way we were interpreting that distance. What we're saying now is that from here on out, that distance will be measured in a straight line from the existing home site to the new home site. And again, that criteria is 300 feet. Certainly, if they're more than 300 feet, they can get a waiver. That's what we just talked about in the second bullet point there. But sorry for rushing through this, but that's kind of a quick and dirty on Lisa's memo. And again, nothing really, nothing's changing here. We're just really clarifying processes for your edification. And eventually, we'll probably put these somewhere in writing that we can refer to them, at a future date, so.
The term, the acronym ETJ?
Oh, that is extraterritorial jurisdiction.
Okay.
So that is a term from state statute.
Yep, that's how
Yep,
that's the reason we became a city.
yep. And basically what that does is it allows municipalities to review what's happening a certain distance from their current borders, in the event that when they grow and develop, there's not surprises out there when they start getting close to that other land.
There's one area that I'd like to bring up for discussion, maybe at the next meeting regarding this.
2 minutes. You got 2 minutes.
Okay, is real quick, is when somebody tears a house down on an existing property, that is a lot, it does not require any claim, they're just going to tear it down, want to remodel.
That's in there, yep.
But it is in here, but it says located on the same footprint.
Okay.
That means that it cannot be outside of the footprint of the house of them. I think we ought to consider changing that to increase and maybe put it into a situation of where maybe a percentage increase over the footprint, as long as it meets all the other criteria. If somebody's going to tear down a house and build a new one there, that is a real restriction because of the addition. They're wanting to do it for some reason. So I would like to look at that in the future for changing that. I think a percentage increase might be a way to solve that.
Let's put this item on our next agenda, because there's going to be some other things that people are going to want to talk about, and we don't have time.
Yep.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 things.
Yeah, and if you want to, drop an email to Wade with anything specific in the meantime, I think that would be great, so if anybody wants to do that. We're going to probably move rural broadband onto the next agenda as well, so just a quick motion to move both of those to the next agenda.
So,
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
I would hope that we would include, we went through this whole part kind of quick, so.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, would
Maybe we should put that whole piece in on the next agenda.
Yeah, and I guess what would maybe be efficient for the next meeting is you've seen what staff is proposing for
Yep.
that item. So to Ed's point, if there's anything you're just letting me know before the meeting so I can come prepared to speak to some of those points.
All right, any department report or announcements?
Nope.
Okay, a motion to adjourn?
Before we do, what Tom had talked about earlier, about having a meeting, trying to get some information for any feeling of this board that we want to do something
Do we
along.
want to try to schedule kind of an open house type thing elsewhere than the city to address that?
I think it's something Tom did bring that up. I think it's something that's valid to at least consider.
Maybe what we could do is set the next meeting date for the items that we need to continue to discuss, and then we can maybe set something
At that
at
time,
that date. So do we
Okay.
want to just quickly set a next meeting date, committee meeting date?
Yeah, can we do that?
Yeah, do you want to, we've got enough to do here, do we want to do October?
If we wanted to stay to our regular pattern of third Tuesday of the month,
Yep,
so that would be October 20th.
okay.
Uh,
At the regular time, 4 o'clock?
Yeah, yep, I think that should work.
All right,
yeah, because if we're going to get, so it's November when we're going to get somebody from, let's say, or the meeting after that whatever has to be in place has got to be in Amy's certified mail
Yep,
for next year's tax stuff.
yep,
So those of us in the rural area who really, really got the short end of the stick, I can use other terms, but I won't.
let's put that item on that agenda too, Wade, so we can discuss it if we need to discuss it.
Because
I'm sorry, what item specifically?
The assessment issue.
Okay.
the timing is,
Is Amy going to need to be at that meeting as well, or?
I don't think so. I mean, we're just going to try to set a time for
Oh,
a
right.
meeting and maybe have general discussion of this topic. Within this body, I want to make sure it's on the agenda so that
Okay.
we can do that.
okay, because very clearly, any property owner's gotta have that to Amy by January
Yep. Okay,
3rd, or you're out of luck for a whole nother year.
did we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
That's a second from Roger. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thanks.